Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Be Like Christ. Welcome back to our Bible study. Today we have quite a significant chapter. This is going to be one that you want to remember. I know that studying through 2 Kings can be kind of long, and there's a lot of names, a lot of kings, a lot of it seems like the same thing going on, but this is quite a significant chapter. We're going to talk about the northern kingdom of Israel essentially ceasing to be a nation anymore. They are going to get conquered by the Assyrians. They're going to get taken captive and basically deported out of their land and spread all over the Assyrian Empire, which essentially marks the end of kind of the organized kingdom of Israel. And so these are God's people being punished for their wickedness. Finally, God's patience has kind of run out in a big way, and they are kicked out of the promised land. So we'll go through more details about that in our outline section. First of all, we want to talk about when these events happen, and of course you can download the PDF on our website for free if you want a copy. The reign of King Hoshea, who's going to be the king at the time of this conquering, fits within the window probably of 740 to 720 BC. He reigned for 9 years in Israel. The deportation of the people of Israel from their land in the northern kingdom is usually dated to about 721 BC. We've gone over a lot of dates. I know not many of them, I wouldn't encourage you to memorize all of them, but 721 BC as the time when Israel is conquered and deported from their land, that one is quite significant. So if you can remember that one, that's a good one. To mark this significant chapter, we have a new map, which you'll notice I had to reorganize the outline to fit it all on there. We needed to see some more land to the east and to the northeast. So first of all, if you look over by the Mediterranean Sea, you'll see Israel and Judah. They've shrunk down quite a bit from our usual map. The kingdom of Israel, the capital of the kingdom of Israel was Samaria, and that's one of the cities that gets conquered by the Assyrians. Now, the Israelites were deported several hundred miles to the northeast of Israel into the land of Assyria, and they were dispersed across the empire of Assyria. This was a policy of the Assyrians, and some people think that it was so that, if you spread out a group of people, it's going to be harder for them to unite and to rebel. So the people of Israel were taken by the Assyrians and spread out all over the kingdom, all the way from Halal. You'll see Halal on the map there just to the right of Nineveh. And then they are also dispersed as far as the cities of Media, which is, all the way on the right of the map. So you're talking hundreds of miles here. Just two characters to highlight in this chapter. First, Hoshea. He was the king after Pekah, and he's the king when the Assyrians conquer Israel. He's the king of Israel. And then the king of Assyria is our other main character. He invaded the land of Israel, conquered the city of Samaria, deported the people of Israel. So just so you know, before we get into our outline, Assyria is really rising to be a world power at this point. Pretty much nobody stands in their way. And so that's what enables them to come down into the land of Israel and conquer it. They are an extremely powerful empire, really, at this point. So now let's talk about our outline. Let's talk about the reign of Hoshea in Israel, verses 1 through 4. After assassinating Pekah, who was the last king of Israel, Hoshea took the throne in his place. Hoshea ruled Israel for 9 years, and he was a king of Israel. So do you want to guess if he was a good king or a wicked king? He was a wicked king. He did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, just like all the other kings of Israel. Not a single good one. During his reign, Israel was subjected to the Assyrian powers, and Hoshea had to pay tribute to them for a while. But then he rebelled against them. He went to Egypt for help. Now, that wasn't a very good decision, and we'll see that in just a few moments. You may remember way back, like during the days of Moses in the book of Deuteronomy, when Moses is giving the law of God to his people. He says, if you don't follow this law, there will come a day when you get expelled from the promised land. Well, that day has come for the wicked northern nation of Israel. God uses the Assyrians to expel Israel from their land, verses 5 through 23. So in response to Hoshea's rebellion, the Assyrians come to Israel and they besiege it for 3 years. The Assyrians took the Israelite cities captive, they took the people captive, and then they deported them hundreds of miles away from their homeland. The text says in verse 7, this occurred because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God. So God was really the one behind this. It wasn't just a Syrian military and political move. God was the one who directed the Assyrians to take this action against his people. Now, verses 7 through 23 is a list of the generational sins of the nation of Israel, the sins that had persisted in this nation for so long that led God to use the Assyrians to judge his people. And particular attention is given to the relentless idol worship in Israel, that even though God had corrected his people, he had warned them again and again, generation after generation, they persisted in this, and that was a big deal to God. That was part of the reason that they were judged, a big part of the reason. Now, the last two bullet points I have on this section are just quotes from the text. I think they speak very clearly about what was going on during these events. So let me just read these. First one is from verses 14 through 15. But they would not listen, speaking of Israel, but were stubborn as their fathers had been, who did not believe in the Lord their God. They despised his statutes and his covenants that he had made with their fathers and the warnings that he gave them. They went after false idols and became false, and they followed the nations that were around them. So rather than being a distinct nation that followed the laws of God, they wanted to be like everybody else. It's never a good idea. Now, the second passage comes from verse 20 and verse 23. Quote, and the Lord rejected all of the descendants of Israel. That's a big statement because they were God's people. The Lord rejected all the descendants of Israel. The Lord removed Israel out of his sight as he had spoken by all of his servants and prophets. So Israel was exiled from their own land to Assyria until this day. God had warned them through the prophets. He had warned them through Moses. He had warned them through the law. God intended to keep those warnings and those promises that he made. If his people were unfaithful, they got kicked out. That's exactly what we're seeing centuries after those warnings were first given. Now, to our final section. We're definitely going to be over 5 minutes on this one, but I don't mind so much on this chapter because it is one that you need to remember. We'll talk a little bit more about it in 2 Chronicles as well. But our last section, okay. New inhabitants are moved into Israel's land. This is verses 24 through 41. The king of Assyria took people from foreign nations, and he moved them into the land that once belonged to the people of Israel. And they intermixed with the people of Israel who remained there. There were some people who the Assyrians left behind in the land, and so these new foreigners moved in, and they intermixed with the remaining Israelites. Now, we're told that the new inhabitants of the land didn't follow God's laws, and so God punished them with lions, and these lions killed a number of people. It's interesting to see the way that God also has control over the natural world and can use it to judge people and can use it for his will. Now, this news of the lions, of the disobedience of these people to God's law, reached the ears of the king of Syria, and he sent a priest back to Israel to teach the people about God's law. And that kind of worked, but not really. The priest did as he was instructed. He taught the people about the true worship of God, or at least what he thought it was. But the people mixed the worship of God with the worship of these pagan gods and these idols. And this pattern of mixed religion continued on into the descendants of these people for generations and generations. And so that is 2 Kings chapter 17, definitely a chapter and events worth remembering. Remember the date for the exile of the Israelites, 721 BC by the Assyrians. Now, there's probably a million applications we could take from this chapter, but I've actually changed our application section today to understanding the Bible, to help us to understand something that we're going to read about in the New Testament when we talk about the people known as the Samaritans. You ever heard of them? You might have heard of the story of the Good Samaritan. Right? So who were those people, and how does that relate back to this story? So in the New Testament, you'll read about these Samaritans, and the Jews really disliked the Samaritans. The Samaritans come from the intermixing of the blood of the remnant of Israel that was left in the land, and these foreigners who were moved into Israel by the king of Assyria. So this is kind of their origin. They were disliked by the Jews for a couple reasons. First of all, because they were mixed in their blood. They were partially Israelites, but they were partially, mixed with all of these other nations, and because they were mixed up in their religious practices. For the sake of time, I can't go into all of the details about the Samaritans, but if you want to know more about them and their origin and their history with the Jews, there's another video on my YouTube channel called why did the Jews hate the Samaritans? And that will give you some backstory for them if you're interested in more details. But for now, we'll conclude the video so that it doesn't turn out to be 15 minutes. And thanks for joining me today for 2 Kings chapter 17. Lord willing, we'll be back tomorrow to talk about the Assyrians coming down to threaten the people of Judah and King Hezekiah in chapter 18.